She found a rusted key in her father's toolbox. It opened a vault no one knew existed. What she discovered inside wasn't just about money. It was about a past that had been deliberately buried to save her life. If you've ever felt like a piece of your own story was missing, stick around. This one might feel familiar. And if it does, I hope you'll subscribe, because this is a place for people who've had to put the pieces back together themselves. The last day was the quietest. For 18 years, my life had been a soundtrack of institutional noise. The squeak of linoleum under sensible shoes, the distant chime of a bell signaling someone else's schedule, the murmur of voices through drywall that was always too thin. On my 18th birthday, all of that just stopped. Silence poured into the space the noise left behind, and it was heavier than any sound I'd ever known. Mr. Henderson, the director of the group home, shook my hand with the kind of forced solemnity reserved for funerals and departures. His grip was dry and brief. "Well, Ilara, the world awaits." He said it like he was reading from a cheap greeting card. He probably was, emotionally speaking. He was a man made of paperwork and procedures, and I was the last form in a very thick file, now stamped, signed, and closed. They gave me a duffel bag with the few clothes I owned, a new toothbrush still in its plastic shell, and a manila envelope containing my birth certificate, my social security card, and $75 in cash. A starting fund, enough for a bus ticket to nowhere and a meal to eat when I got there. The final piece of the state-sponsored farewell package was a cardboard box sealed with yellowing tape. "These are your father's effects," Mr. Henderson said, placing it on the scuffed reception desk between us. "They've been in storage. Legally, they're yours now." Effects. It was such a sterile word for the remnants of a life. My father, Liam, wasn't a ghost to me. He was a void, a question mark carved into my history. I had a single faded photograph of him, a man with tired eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them, holding a much younger version of me on his shoulders. He'd been a mechanic, they told me, a man who was good with his hands, but not with his life. He'd lost his job, his wife, my mother, to an illness I couldn't remember, and finally, he'd lost me to the system. He'd passed away when I was 6, a footnote in a social worker's report. An overdose, the file said. A quiet, messy end to a quiet, messy life. I took the box. It wasn't heavy. It felt hollow, like a promise that had been emptied out. I didn't say, "Thank you." The word felt wrong, like trying to fit the wrong key into a lock. Instead, I just nodded, turned, and walked out the door. The lock clicked behind me, a sound of finality that was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, there was no one to check me in, no curfew to meet, no one to be accountable to but myself. I was free, and I had never felt more trapped. My first night of freedom was spent in a room at a weekly rate motel on the industrial outskirts of the city. The air smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. The window looked out onto the flickering neon sign of a pawn shop across the street. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and stared at the cardboard box. It was the only thing in the room that was truly mine, a legacy of rust and dust. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt like disturbing a grave. What could possibly be in there? A few greasy tools? A worn-out wallet with nothing inside? Proof of the failure they'd all told me he was. The system doesn't like ambiguity. It assigns narratives. My father's was simple. A tragic case, a man who couldn't cope, a cautionary tale. And I was the consequence, the project to be managed until I could be released into the wild. Finally, the silence of the room became more intimidating than the contents of the box. My fingers fumbled with the brittle tape, peeling it back in dry, cracking strips. The cardboard flaps sighed open. The smell that rose from the box was faint but distinct, oil, metal, and something that reminded me of damp earth. Inside, nestled in a bed of old cotton rags, were the tools of his trade. A heavy ball-peen hammer with a dark, polished handle, smooth from the grip of his hand. A set of wrenches, their steel surfaces pitted with tiny specks of rust. A screwdriver with a chipped orange plastic handle. They were simple, honest objects. They had been used. They had fixed things. I ran my fingers over the cool metal, trying to feel a connection, a memory, anything. There was nothing, just cold steel. Underneath the tools was a small, flat wooden box. A cigar box, maybe. The lid wasn't locked. I lifted it. Inside there was the photograph I knew, the one of him and me. But there was another one, too, tucked behind it. It was of a woman with my color hair and a wide, brilliant smile. My mother. She was standing in front of a small, rustic-looking cabin, her arms wrapped around a younger Liam. He looked different here. The exhaustion wasn't in his eyes yet. He looked happy, truly happy. It was a punch to the gut. It was a life I had no part in, a memory that wasn't mine. At the very bottom of the cardboard box, half hidden by a rag, was the last item. It was a key. It was heavy, made of old iron, with a simple, circular head and a complex, jagged bit. A skeleton key, but thicker, more industrial. A thick coat of rust covered its surface, flaking off on my fingers like dried blood. It looked ancient, like something you'd find at the bottom of a well. It didn't belong with the modern tools. It felt like it came from another time, another story. There was no tag, no label. Just the key. An answer to a question I didn't even know how to ask. I closed my hand around it. The cold, rough texture was grounding. It was a solid object in a life that felt completely abstract. It was a mystery, and it was mine. The next day, my caseworker, Mr. Davies, called. He was the closest thing I had to a continuous presence in my life. A man who had overseen my file through 3 different foster homes and 2 group facilities. He was pragmatic, always tired, but there was a sliver of kindness in him that the system hadn't managed to sand away. "Ilara," he said, his voice tinny over the phone. "Just checking in. Did you get settled somewhere for the night?" "A motel," I said, looking around the grim little room. "It's fine." "Okay, good. Listen, there's one last piece of administrative business. Your father's estate." I almost laughed. "His estate?" "Mr. Davies, I have his effects. It's a box of old tools." There was a pause on the line. "Yes, well, there's also a property, a piece of land. It's in your name, held in trust until you turned 18. It's yours now." The silence in the room suddenly felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a roaring confusion. "A property? What are you talking about? Where?" "It's rural, Ilara. Very rural. A small parcel of land up in a town called Havenwood. According to the file, there's a structure on it, an old workshop, maybe a small residence attached. The deed was in your name, filed by your father shortly before before. Havenwood. I'd never heard of it. Why did no one ever tell me this?" "Frankly, it was deemed a liability, not an asset," he said, his tone shifting into bureaucratic autopilot. "The property taxes haven't been paid in over a decade. The town could seize it at any moment. It's listed in the county records as derelict. The state had no interest in maintaining it, and you were a minor. It was just a piece of paper in your file. But the law is the law. It's yours now, along with the debt attached to it. A derelict workshop and a mountain of debt. It sounded about right. Another piece of my father's failed legacy. Just bigger and more complicated than a box of tools. "What am I supposed to do with it?" I asked, my voice small. "Most kids in your situation would just let it go," he said gently. "Let the county take it. You have $75, Alara. You need to be thinking about a job, a place to live here, not some ruin in the middle of nowhere." He was right. It was the logical thing to do, the sensible path. Forget it. Move on. Build a life from the blank slate I'd been given. But as he spoke, my fingers tightened around the rusted key in my pocket. A derelict workshop, a structure, a key without a lock, a town I'd never heard of, a life I never knew. It wasn't logical. It was a long shot. It was probably a dead end, another disappointment waiting for me. But it was the only thread I had. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice clearer now, more solid. "Can you tell me how to get to Havenwood?" The bus ride was a journey through a landscape of forgetting. We left the city's gray sprawl behind, rolling through anonymous suburbs that bled into tired-looking farmland. The towns we passed through had a sameness to them: a single main street, a boarded-up movie theater, a gas station, and a diner. For hours, I just watched the world slide past the greasy window, a blur of green and brown. My reflection was a faint ghost superimposed over the passing scenery, a girl with no past heading toward a future that was just as blurry. I held the key in my pocket, its jagged edges pressing into my palm. It was a focal point, an anchor in the dizzying emptiness. Every time a wave of panic or doubt washed over me, the sheer stupidity of spending almost all my money on this one-way ticket, I would just squeeze the key. It was a tangible piece of a puzzle. My father had left it. He had left the property. These were not random acts, they were choices. For a man I'd been taught was defined by his inability to make good choices, this felt significant. It felt like intention. The bus wheezed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a single, sun-bleached sign that read, Havenwood. There was no station. There was just the sign, a gravel shoulder, and a narrow paved road that disappeared into a thick forest of pine and oak trees. The bus driver gave me a look of mild pity as I stepped off. "This is it, kid? You sure this is where you want to be?" "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic sigh, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and a profound, ringing silence. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and damp soil. The silence wasn't empty, like in the motel room. It was alive. It was filled with the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the hum of insects. I was completely, utterly alone. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder and started walking down the road, into the trees. The address Mr. Davies had given me was for a property on Old Mill Road. After walking for what felt like miles, I found it. The road was barely more than a dirt track, branching off the main paved one. A rusted, leaning mailbox stood sentinel at the entrance, the name Keller barely visible under layers of rust and grime. My father's name, my name. Seeing it there, in faded paint, was like hearing a whisper from the past. I followed the track as it wound deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker here, their branches forming a canopy that dappled the ground in shifting patterns of light and shadow. And then the trees opened up into a small clearing, and I saw it. Derelict was the right word. It was a long, low building, a workshop made of cinder blocks and corrugated metal. The metal roof was sagging in the middle, streaked with long, weeping trails of rust. The windows were boarded up or broken, dark, vacant eyes staring out at the wilderness that was slowly reclaiming the clearing. Attached to one side was a smaller, shack-like structure made of wood, which must have been the cabin. Its porch had collapsed on one side, and the front door hung crookedly from a single hinge. The whole place looked like it was tired of standing, like it was slowly surrendering to gravity and time. This was my inheritance, a monument to decay. For a moment, I just stood there, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Mr. Davies was right. This was a liability, a ruin, a mistake. I should have stayed in the city. I should have found a job, any job. I should have let this place be swallowed by the trees and the back taxes. But I had come this far, and I still had the key. I walked toward the cabin first. The crooked door groaned open with a push. The inside was a disaster. Dust lay thick on every surface, stirred into dancing clouds by the light filtering through the grimy windows. There was a small iron stove in one corner, a rickety table with one chair, and a narrow cot with a moldy mattress. A family of mice scattered as I stepped inside. It was a place of abandonment, a place where a life had ended. Next, I went to the workshop. The main door was a huge, sliding metal affair, and it was padlocked. The lock was new and shiny compared to everything else. I didn't have a key for that. I circled the building. There was a smaller side door, its wood swollen and warped by years of rain and snow. The knob wouldn't turn. I peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. It was too dark to see anything inside. Defeated, I sat down on a moss-covered log, the silence of the clearing pressing in on me. This was it. The end of the line. A locked building, a rotting cabin, and a key that fit nothing. I pulled it from my pocket and stared at it. It was so specific, so intricate. A key like this wasn't made for a simple padlock or a cabin door. It was made for something important. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the workshop again, more slowly this time. I was looking for a door, a lock. But what if I was looking for the wrong thing? My father was a mechanic. He worked with metal, with engines, with concrete floors that had to bear the weight of cars and machinery. My gaze dropped from the walls to the foundation. A thick concrete slab extended from the front of the workshop, a sort of makeshift parking area, now cracked and overrun with weeds. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on the gravel. I started at one end and walked the perimeter, my eyes tracing every crack, every dark stain. And then I saw it. It was almost completely hidden by a tangle of weeds and a layer of packed dirt. A square outline in the concrete, about 3 feet by 3 feet. It wasn't a crack. It was a seam. And in the center of the seam, set flush with the concrete in a small, recessed metal plate, was a keyhole. It was dark, clogged with dirt, but it was unmistakably a lock. It was old, iron, and it looked like it had been waiting there for a very, very long time. My heart started to pound, a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the damp earth. I used my fingers to claw away the dirt and leaves, clearing the metal plate. I took the key from my pocket. My hand was trembling. I had to steady it with my other one as I lined up the bit with the keyhole. It slid in. The fit was perfect. It felt like it had come home. I took a deep breath and turned it. For a second, nothing happened. The key wouldn't budge. It was frozen with rust and time. I put both hands on it, leveraging all of my weight. I thought the key might snap. I thought the lock might be broken beyond repair. And then, with a deep, groaning screech of metal on metal, it turned. A loud, satisfying clunk echoed from beneath the concrete. I pulled the key out and looked for a handle. There was a small, recessed metal ring near the edge of the square hatch. I hooked my fingers through it and pulled. It was incredibly heavy. It felt like I was trying to lift the world. I strained, my muscles screaming, my feet slipping on the gravel. Inch by inch, the concrete slab lifted, scraping against its frame. It was a hatch, a door set into the floor. When it was high enough, I propped it open with a loose cinder block. I peered down into the darkness. A set of steep concrete steps led down into a small, square room. The air that rose up was cool and dry and smelled faintly of dust and paper. It was a vault. A hidden cellar. My father, the man who couldn't manage his own life, had built a vault. My mind was reeling. What was this place? Why was it hidden? I fumbled in my duffel bag for the small flashlight that came with my state-issued departure kit. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the space below. The room was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with bare concrete walls. It was completely empty, except for one thing. In the center of the floor sat a large, olive-drab metal footlocker, the kind the military used. It was closed, secured with 2 heavy latches on the front. I descended the steps, the flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The air was still and cold. It felt like I had stepped out of time. I knelt in front of the footlocker. My heart was hammering. This was it. This was the reason for the key, for the property, for the long bus ride into the middle of nowhere. The latches weren't locked. They were just stiff. I flipped them open, the metal clanging loudly in the small, silent space. I took another breath, held it, and lifted the heavy lid. The beam of my flashlight fell upon the contents, and I forgot how to breathe. The top layer was cash, stacks and stacks of it, bundled in paper bands. 50s and hundreds. It wasn't a fortune, not millions, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. More than I could have imagined. My mind struggled to process it. Where did a failed mechanic get this kind of money? But underneath the cash, there was something else, something far more valuable. It was a thick bundle of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me, to Alara, in a neat, careful script that I had never seen before. I reached in and lifted the bundle out. It was heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The top envelope simply said, "Read this first." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the letter. It was several pages long, filled with that same neat handwriting. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of the vault, my back against the wall, and with the narrow beam of my flashlight, I began to read. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, it means you have turned 18 and you are on your own. For that, I am more sorry than you can ever know. Second, it means that I am gone. I hope that I died peacefully, but I doubt it. That is not the life I have lived. I know what they have told you about me, that I was weak, that I gave up, that I abandoned you. I need you to know, with every fiber of your being, that it is a lie. Everything I have done, every single day since your mother died, has been for you. This place, this money, these letters, they are my proof. I was a good mechanic, Ilara. Maybe too good. I got a reputation for being able to fix anything, especially custom work that other shops wouldn't touch. That reputation brought the wrong kind of people to my door. People with a lot of money and no patience for the law. I started doing work for a man named Silas Croft. He wasn't a gangster in a movie. He was a businessman, a developer. He bought land, he built things, and he crushed anyone who got in his way. He used loan sharks and enforcers the way other men use hammers and nails. Your grandfather, my father, owned a piece of land on the coast. It was beautiful, but it was all he had. Croft wanted it. He needed it for a big resort project. My father wouldn't sell. So Croft came at him another way. He manufactured a debt. He loaned my father money against the property through a dozen shell companies with impossible terms. When my father couldn't pay, Croft sent his men. They didn't break his legs. They broke his spirit. He died of a heart attack a month later. The land was gone. I was angry. I was young and stupid. I thought I could get justice. I started digging into Croft's business. I used my skills to get into his private network, his financial records. I was a mechanic, not just with cars, but with systems. I found proof of extortion, bribery, money laundering, enough to put him away for life. But I was clumsy. He found out I had it before I could take it to the authorities. And that's when he came for me. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted the proof. And he knew exactly how to get it. He threatened you. You were 4 years old. He told me, in very calm, very specific detail, what would happen to you if I didn't give him everything I had. I looked at you, sleeping in your bed, and I knew I had lost. I couldn't protect you and fight him at the same time. So I made a choice. I built this place, this vault, in secret. I put the evidence here. The original hard drive is at the bottom of this box. I gave him a copy, a fake one that was just convincing enough to buy me some time. And then, I disappeared. I staged my death. The overdose, the whole story. It was a fiction I created to get Croft off my trail. I knew the state would take you. It broke my heart, Ilara, into a million pieces. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. But I believed you would be safer as an orphan of the state than as the daughter of a man being hunted. In their system, you would be a number, a file. You would be anonymous. You would be safe. I had to stop reading. The letter slipped from my fingers. The flashlight beam danced across the concrete walls. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent. I wasn't crying for the little girl who was abandoned. I was crying for the father who had to do the abandoning. The story I had carried my whole life, of a weak man, a failure, an addict, it all just dissolved, replaced by this impossible, heartbreaking image of a man making the ultimate sacrifice. He hadn't left me. He had hidden me. I wiped my eyes with the back of my dusty hand and picked up the letter again. I've spent the last 12 years on the run, working odd jobs for cash, always looking over my shoulder. Every spare dollar I ever made, I sent to a trusted friend who put it in this box for you. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough. Enough for you to start over, to go anywhere you want, to build a life far away from Havenwood, far away from Croft and his memory. That is my greatest wish for you, Ilara. That you take this money and you run. You disappear and you live. You be happy. Don't try to be a hero. I already tried that, and it cost me everything. It cost me you. All my love, forever. Dad. I sat there in the cold, dark vault for what must have been hours, the letter in my lap. My entire world had been rebuilt and then shattered in the space of 10 minutes. He was alive, somewhere out there, or he had been. He had loved me. He had protected me. The emptiness I had carried inside me for so long was suddenly filled with a grief so profound it was a physical weight. I grieved for the years we'd lost. I grieved for the father I never knew. And I grieved for the man who had to live a life in the shadows, just so I could have a life in the sun. The next few hours passed in a blur of shock and sorrow. I read the letter again and again, the words burning themselves into my memory. Then, slowly, I began to read the others. They weren't all as dramatic. They were letters from a father to a daughter he couldn't know. He wrote to me on my 7th birthday, imagining what kind of cake I'd like. He wrote to me on my first day of middle school, wishing he could be there to see me off. He told me stories about my mother, about their life in the little cabin, about how much she had wanted me. He told me about his father, my grandfather, and the land he had lost. Through these letters, a man I had only known as a faded photograph came to life. He was smart. He was funny. He was tender and heartbroken and fiercely protective. He filled the void inside me, page by page. I cried until I had no tears left, until I was just a hollowed-out shell of exhaustion and emotion, sitting in a concrete hole in the ground with a box full of money and ghosts. Eventually, the sun began to set, and the light filtering down the steps of the vault faded to a deep gray. I knew I couldn't stay down there forever. I carefully repacked the letters, placing them on top of the money. At the very bottom of the box, just as he'd said, was a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. A hard drive. The evidence. The reason for all of this. I closed the lid of the footlocker, the sound echoing in the stillness. I left it in the vault. I couldn't bear to take it with me yet. I climbed the steps, my legs stiff and weak, and pushed the heavy concrete hatch back into place. The final scrape of concrete on concrete felt like closing a book. I stumbled back to the rotting cabin and collapsed onto the moldy cot. I didn't have the energy to feel scared of the mice or the dark. Sleep came like a stone, heavy and dreamless. I woke to the sound of birdsong. For a confusing moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the memories of the day before came rushing back, a tidal wave of revelation and grief. The vault, the money, the letters, my father. My first instinct was to follow his instructions. Take the money and run, disappear. It was what he wanted. He had suffered for years to give me that chance. It felt like the only way to honor his sacrifice. I could go to college. I could travel. I could be anyone, anywhere. It was a dizzying prospect, a future I had never dared to imagine. I spent the morning in a daze, walking the property. I looked at the sagging roof of the workshop, the collapsed porch of the cabin. This place was a ruin, yes, but it was my ruin. My father had built it. He had hidden his love for me in its very foundation. Leaving it felt like leaving him all over again. I found a rusty hand pump over an old well behind the cabin. After a few minutes of strenuous pumping, a stream of icy, clear water gushed out. I drank deeply, the cold water a shock to my system. It tasted of iron and earth. It tasted real. My mind was a battlefield. One voice, the voice of reason and my father's wishes, screamed at me to pack the money and leave. Get on the first bus out of this forgotten town and never look back. Create a new identity, one free from the shadows of Silas Croft and a hunted father. But another voice, a quieter, more stubborn one, was whispering something else. It told me that running was what my father had been forced to do. It was a life of fear, of looking over his shoulder. He had done it so I wouldn't have to. But if I took the money and ran, wasn't I just continuing the cycle? Wasn't I letting Croft win, again? My father had lost his home. My grandfather had lost his. This small, derelict piece of land was the only thing left. It was a foothold, a place to make a stand. The thought was terrifying. I was 18 years old. I had $75 to my name. Well, more now, but that money felt sacred, like it wasn't mine to use. I had no power, no resources, no one. Croft was a monster who had crushed my father, a grown man with skills and knowledge. What could I possibly do? The conflict raged inside me all day. I swept out the cabin, tearing out the rotten mattress and scrubbing the floor with water from the well. The physical work helped. It quieted the noise in my head. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of ownership, of connection to the place. This was the first home that was truly mine, a home my father had built for me. Late in the afternoon, I went back to the vault. I needed to read the last letter again. The one that was separate from the others, tucked into a side pocket of the footlocker. I had skipped it before, overwhelmed by the first one. It was in a sealed envelope with the words, "Only read this if you're having second thoughts," written on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Elara," it started, his handwriting seeming a little less steady here. I knew you might be stubborn. You get that from your mother. If you are reading this, it means the simple plan, taking the money and living a happy life, isn't sitting right with you. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. I want you to know that you have my blessing to walk away. You owe me nothing. You don't have to fight my battles. But if you feel in your heart that you must, then you cannot do it alone. I was a fool to think I could. Croft is a cancer. He's rooted deep in the legal system, in the local government. You can't fight him head on. There is another way. This property, this workshop, it's not just a hideout, it's leverage. Look at a county map. Look at what surrounds it. Croft has spent 20 years buying up every parcel of land around Havenwood for his luxury golf resort. Every parcel except this one. This little square of dirt sits right in the middle of his planned 18th hole. Without it, his project is crippled. He thinks it's just an abandoned lot tied up in tax debt. He doesn't know it belongs to you. He doesn't know what's buried under it. The money I left you isn't enough to fight him in court forever, but it might be enough to start. Enough to pay the back taxes and get the deed cleared. Enough to hire a lawyer who isn't afraid of him. There was a woman, a lawyer who helped my father in the beginning, before things got ugly. Her name is Evelyn Reed. She has an office in Oakhaven, the next town over. She's old school. She hates men like Croft. I don't know if she's still practicing, but if she is, she might listen. Tell her you're Liam Keller's daughter. Tell her you found the key. This is your choice, Alara, not mine. The safe path is to disappear. The hard path is to stay and fight for our name, for our land, for your grandfather's memory. I couldn't win, but maybe you can. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you. He had given me a choice. He had given me a weapon. And he had given me a name, Evelyn Reed. The decision settled over me, not with a crash, but with a quiet, solid certainty. I was done running. I hadn't even started, and I was done. My whole life had been a passive experience, being moved from one place to another by forces beyond my control. For the first time, I had a real choice, and I chose to stay. I chose to fight. I was my father's daughter, and this was my home. The first step was the hardest. I had to leave the sanctuary of the property and re-engage with the world. I took a few $100s from one of the stacks of cash. It felt like a betrayal of my father's wish for me to save it, but his second letter had given me permission. This was seed money for a war. I walked the miles back to the main road and waited. It was hours before a pickup truck rattled to a stop, driven by a grizzled farmer who looked at me with suspicion, but agreed to give me a ride to Oakhaven for $20. Oakhaven was a proper town, bigger than the crossroads of Havenwood, with a courthouse square and shops that had lights on inside. I found Evelyn Reed's law office on a quiet side street. It was a small, unassuming brick building with her name in faded gold letters on the glass door. It looked like a place that time had forgotten. I almost lost my nerve. But I thought of my father's words, and I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. The woman sitting behind a large, cluttered wooden desk looked up over a pair of reading glasses. She had to be in her late 70s, with a shock of white hair and a face etched with lines of fierce intelligence. She looked like she could wither a man with a single stare. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy but strong. "I'm looking for Evelyn Reed," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "You found her. What's your trouble?" I took a breath. "My name is Ilara Keller. My father was Liam Keller." Her eyes sharpened. The change was immediate and intense. She took off her glasses and placed them deliberately on the desk. She studied my face, searching for something. "Liam Keller. I haven't heard that name in a long time. They said he was dead." "He is," I said, the lie feeling heavy and necessary. "But he left me something. He told me to find you. He said to tell you I found the key." Evelyn Reed was silent for a full minute. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. I thought she was going to tell me to leave. Then she nodded slowly. "I see. And what exactly did this key open?" "A vault," I said. "On his property in Havenwood." She leaned back in her chair, a flicker of something. Surprise? Respect? In her eyes. "He actually did it. The stubborn fool. He actually did it." She gestured to the worn leather chair opposite her desk. "Sit down, child, and tell me everything." I did. I told her about the group home, about the box of tools, the key, the vault, the money, the letters. I left out the part about my father staging his death. I just let her believe he had died as the official record stated. But I told her about the hard drive. I told her about Silas Croft and the land he'd stolen from my grandfather. She listened without interrupting, her gaze never leaving my face. When I was finished, the office was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "Silas Croft," she said, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. "That man has had a stranglehold on this county for 20 years. He's a blight. I fought him for your grandfather. I lost. It's one of the few cases in my career that I truly regret." "My father said you might help me," I said, hope and fear warring in my chest. She looked at the stacks of paper on her desk, at the dusty law books lining the walls. "I'm semi-retired, girl. I handle wills and property disputes for old farmers. I'm not equipped to go to war with a man like Croft." My heart sank. Of course. It was a stupid, desperate hope. "But," she said, holding up a finger, a glint of fire in her old eyes, "the thought of wiping that smug grin off his face is deeply, deeply appealing. And your father, for all his faults, was a good man who deserved better. Your grandfather certainly did." She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. It was an old, heavy metal thing. She pulled open a drawer, the runners groaning in protest, and began to rifle through thick, dusty files. Keller. Ah, here we are." She pulled out a file that was thick with age and set it on the desk with a thud. "Your family's history." "What do we do?" I asked. "First, we make you legitimate," she said, her voice all business now. "We use some of that money to pay every cent of the back taxes on that property. We get the deed cleared and in your name, free and clear. We make you untouchable on that front. Then, we get that hard drive. We find a specialist, someone I trust, to see what's on it and if it's still viable after all these years. That is our only real weapon." She looked at me, her expression serious. "This will not be easy, Elara. Croft will find out the property has been claimed. He will come after you. Not with thugs in the night. He's too sophisticated for that now. He will come at you with lawyers, with injunctions, with offers of money that will seem impossible to refuse. He will try to bury you in paper and crush you with legal fees. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my father, living a life on the run. I thought of the love and pain poured into those letters. I thought of the quiet resilience in his handwriting. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." A slow smile spread across Evelyn Reed's face. "Good. Then let's get to work." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of purpose. Evelyn was a force of nature. We paid the taxes, a sum that made me sick to my stomach but brought an incredible sense of relief. The property was mine. The town clerk, a man who had clearly been in Croft's pocket for years, looked at us with stunned disbelief when Evelyn slammed the certified check down on his counter. For the first time, a small crack appeared in Croft's monolithic control of the region. I moved into the cabin. It was barely habitable, but it was mine. I spent my days cleaning, patching the roof with tar, replacing the broken window panes. I used the money from the vault sparingly, buying supplies at the local hardware store. The work was hard, but it was healing. With every nail I hammered, with every board I replaced, I felt like I was not just rebuilding a structure, but rebuilding myself. I was putting down roots in the only soil that had ever been offered to me. The locals were wary at first. I was an outsider, a ghost from a family they barely remembered. But they saw me working. They saw the smoke rising from the cabin's chimney on cold mornings. I started buying my groceries at the small general store in Havenwood's one-street town center. The owner, a woman named Mary, eventually cracked a smile. "You're Liam Keller's girl, aren't you?" she asked one day as she rang up my supplies. "I am," I said. "You've got his eyes," she said. "He was always a hard worker. A bit lost after his wife passed, but a good man. It's good to have a Keller back on that land." It was a small thing, but it felt huge. It was a thread of connection, a sense of belonging that I had never known. Evelyn hired a computer forensics expert, a quiet man who came to her office late one night. I gave him the hard drive, my hands shaking as I passed over the object that had cost my father his life. He returned a week later with a report. The data was intact. It was all there: ledgers, offshore account numbers, recorded phone calls. It was a detailed map of Silas Croft's criminal empire. It was a bomb. "Now the real fight begins," Evelyn said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "He'll know we have it soon enough. The trick is not to use it like a club, but like a scalpel." As she predicted, the letters started arriving. Official, threatening letters from a high-powered law firm in the city. They offered to buy my property for a generous sum. When I refused, the offer doubled. Then it tripled. It was life-changing money, enough to fulfill my father's original wish for me 10 times over. Every time a new offer arrived, I felt a pang of doubt. My father wanted me to be safe, to be happy. This was the easy path to that life. But then I would walk out to the workshop my father had built, touch the concrete slab that hid the vault, and I would read another one of his letters. I would remember my grandfather, a man I'd never met, who had died of a broken heart for a piece of land. And I would remember Evelyn's words. "He's a blight." I told her to refuse every offer. The fight isn't over, not by a long shot. Evelyn has presented the evidence to the state attorney general's office, using back channels to make sure it doesn't get buried by Croft's influence. There are investigations happening now, quiet and slow-moving. Croft knows we are the source. His lawyers have filed a dozen frivolous lawsuits against me, trying to drain my resources and my will. They are challenging the deed, the will, my very existence. It's a war of attrition. But something has changed. For me, and for this place. I am not the same girl who stepped off that bus a few months ago. I have a home. I have a purpose. I have a story that makes sense. The workshop is no longer a symbol of failure. It's a fortress built by a father's love. The cabin is not a shack. It's the first place I have ever felt truly safe. Some days are hard. The loneliness creeps in. The fear that I've made the wrong choice, that Croft will find a way to win, is a constant companion. On those days, I go down into the vault, I open the footlocker, and I read my father's letters. His voice, his love, his sacrifice, it's all there. He couldn't win his fight, but he left me the tools to win mine. The wrenches and hammers, the cash, the letters, the key. It was all part of his toolbox. My inheritance wasn't a derelict property and a box of rusty tools. It was a second chance. It was a story. And it was the choice to stand my ground, to fight for the memory of the people who came before me, and to build a future on the foundation they left behind. Home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you fight for. It's a story you're willing to see through to the end. I don't know how my story will end. I don't know if I will win in the legal sense. But I have already won the battle that matters. I found my past, and in doing so, I found my future. I know who I am. I am Alara Keller, and I am home. You know, when I first started this journey, I felt completely alone. Like I was the only person in the world adrift in a story I didn't understand. But sharing this, putting it into words, makes me realize that none of us are truly alone in these struggles. So many of us are piecing together histories that were broken or hidden from us. We're all looking for that key, that one thing that will unlock the truth and show us where we belong. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that sense of searching for a missing piece of your own life, I hope you'll consider subscribing and joining our community here. And more than that, I want to hear from you. What did this story teach you about the meaning of home or inheritance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them because your stories matter. They are the pieces that help all of us feel a little less alone. Thank you for listening,